Hey everyone, I'm Tsetzuko, and you're watching my Death Knight Spells and Abilities overview for World of Warcraft Shadowlands. Now, in this video, we're going to be covering the spells and abilities that are in the Death Knight class tab of the spellbook. So these spells are going to be available to all specializations, and this is a generalized video that's going to talk about those abilities as they apply to those different specializations. We'll cover spec-specific abilities in a later video. Now, as we go through our spellbook, we're only going to be focusing on these spells and abilities that we have baseline. We're not going to be covering any talented abilities. We're going to have talents covered in a different video entirely, so keep that in mind. Also, as we go through, we're going to be dragging our abilities onto our action bar in the designated areas that I've set up for these different abilities, and I'll kind of cover what those are as we get to them. Okay, so now that we've got all that covered, it's time to jump into it. We're going to kick things off with our first ability here, which is Anti-Magic Shell. Now, this is an instant cast ability with a 1-minute cooldown. It surrounds you with the Anti-Magic Shell for 5 seconds, absorbing up to a large amount of damage and preventing the application of harmful magical effects. Damage absorbed will generate runic power. Now, this is a defensive cooldown we can use, so we're going to drop this over here off to the side. Now, a couple of notes about Anti-Magic Shell. First off, it only works against magic damage, and also it only prevents the application of harmful spells. So this doesn't do anything against physical damage, and also if you already have existing harmful magical effects, it will not clear them from you. It'll just prevent new ones from being placed on you. Now, when you get hit by damage, or if you have that existing dot and it deals damage to magic damage to the shield, you will generate runic power from this. So primarily we're using this as something to block magic damage, maybe help us generate a little bit of runic power. It's a proactive style ability, not a reactive style ability. So this is the kind of ability you need to cast ahead of time when you're anticipating a big burst of magic damage. Our next ability is Anti-Magic Zone. So this is an instant cast ability with a 2-minute cooldown. It places a anti-magic zone down on the ground for 10 seconds that will reduce spell damage taken by party or raid members by 20% as long as they're inside the zone. So once again, this is a little bit more of a proactive ability that you're going to want to use. You're going to want to place this up when you know big damage is incoming, and then your party or raid member needs to stand within the zone to get the bonus, but you're going to be able to deflect and reduce that damage when it comes in. Once again, this is spell damage, so if somebody's in here wailing on you with an axe, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. So we're going to drag this down as well and place it here on our spell bar. Okay, so our next ability is Chains of Ice. Chains of Ice is an ability that costs 1 rune. It's instant cast and does not have a cooldown. It shackles the target with frozen chains, reducing movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds. So this is a crowd control ability that we have, and we're going to place this down here on our action bar above our defensive abilities. So Chains of Ice, you just throw it out. It puts some movement speed reduction on the target. It does have that 30-yard range, so you can just use this in order to control your opponents. Generally in PvE, it's not too crazy of a good ability until you get into Mythic Plus or some raid-specific mechanics. Works wonders in PvP, however. Next, we have Control Undead. This costs 1 rune, has a 1.4 second cast time and a 30-yard range. It dominates the target undead creature up to level 51 or several levels above yours, forcing it to do your bidding for 5 minutes. So this basically gives you a little undead minion if you have undead creatures around that you can use. Now, basically the level limitation is there so that as a level 50 or whatever, I can't go out and get a level 60 undead to help me just smash on everything, you know, as I'm out there questing and stuff. We're going to put this off over to the side. This is kind of a ability that we're going to set up prior to combat most of the time, and that's kind of where we're going to keep those abilities, is over here. Next, we have Corpse Exploder. I believe this is kind of a niche ability. It's a 30-yard range, instant cast, 15-second cooldown ability. It causes a corpse to explode in a shower of gore. Does not affect mechanical or elemental corpses. It's a flavor ability that you can pick up. It just lets you make a lot of gore and exploding corpses. So we're going to throw that over here by Control Undead as well. Next, we have Dark Command. This is our taunt ability. It has a 30-yard range, instant cast with an 8-second cooldown. It commands the target to attack you. So this is just our standard taunt ability. We're going to put that down here in this section, our first section on the top right-hand side. This is where we put our utility abilities that we want to have access to, but don't necessarily want to spam all the time. So depending on what spec we are, we're going to want to use Dark Command a little bit more often. So obviously for Blood, we're going to be, taunting a little bit more, but for the other ones, not so much. Next, we have Death and Decay. This is an ability that costs 1 rune, has a 30-yard range, is instant with a 15-second cooldown, and it will corrupt the target ground, causing shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets within the area. While you remain in the area, one of your abilities, depending on your specialization, will hit additional targets. So there's a couple parts here. One, you put a big circle on the ground and it deals damage to all targets that are inside of it. But also, while you're inside of it, you turn one of your single target abilities into a multi-target ability. Now we're spec'd Blood right here in this video, so it's saying that our Heart Strike will hit up to 3 additional targets, and that's just going to change based on what specialization we are in. Now, this is part of our core rotation. We're going to cast this ability a lot on many of our specializations, so we're going to put that right down here on the bottom first bar all the way on the left. Next, we have Death Coil. Now, Death Coil costs 40 runic power, has a 30-yard range, and is instant cast. It fires a blast of unholy energy at the target, causing 324 shadow damage to an enemy or healing an undead ally for 1500 health. So, this ability is either a utility ability or a core ability, depending on your specialization. If you are spec'd Unholy, then Death Coil is part of your core rotation and should go down right here. If you're not, then it's a utility ability and we will put it up here on the top bar. Since I'm spec'd Blood in this video, I'm going to put it here at the top. Now, a couple of things to note about Death Coil. It does cost the runic power. A lot of times you will be using it for the damage component, but it will heal an undead ally as well. Now, you don't have a lot of undead allies. You have possibly your control undead target. You might have your raise dead pet target, or you can also turn yourself into an undead for a limited duration with another ability that we're going to see coming up, and then cast Death Coil to heal yourself. That's not an amazing combination and not necessarily one that I would recommend that you rely on, but it is something that you can do. That being said, it is just sort of a ranged way for you to spend runic power, which may come in handy on a couple of the specializations, but more than likely you're really only going to be paying attention to Death Coil on your Unholy Death Knight as part of their core rotation. The next ability we have is Death Gate. This costs 1 rune, has a 3.7 second cast time, 1 minute cooldown. It opens a gate that you can take back to Ebon Hold, which is the headquarters for Death Knights. And using a Death Gate inside of Ebon Hold will return you back to your departure point. So this is a utility ability that we're just going to throw over here. It's something we use outside of combat. It just allows us to port to a different location on command at will. This has come in handy to varying degrees based on the content and where Ebon Hold is actually located, because it does move, so that does change. There's less of a reason to go there in general, but you do want to go there a lot of times if you're changing or modifying your rune weapon enchantments, which we'll see here coming up as well. Next, we have Death Grip. This is a 30-yard range instant cast ability with a 15-second cooldown. It harnesses the energy that surrounds and binds all matter, drawing the target towards you and forcing the enemy to attack you. So there's two parts here. One, it will yank a target over to you from up to 30 yards away. So this is a great way to engage or to pull enemies or to chain enemies. If you're out there questing, you just death grip them in and then you death grip the next guy. But it also does a little taunt here too, because it forces that target to attack you. So even at close range, if you need sort of like a taunt and your taunt is on cooldown, you can death grip a target over. And even though you may not pull them very far, you'll force them to attack you for just a little bit, which may be the difference between saving your healer's life or not. So you have the options there. More than likely, you're just using this to yank stuff over to you like Scorpion from Mortal Kombat, but you do have that option there with that additional, hey, I can kind of use this as a pseudo taunt. Death Grip is a utility ability that we're going to be using pretty frequently, so we're going to put it over here on the top of our bar in this section. Now our next ability is Death Strike. This one's kind of like Death Coil in the sense that depending on the specialization you're playing as, this will or will not be a core ability versus a utility one. If you're playing on a Blood Decay, Death Strike is going to be part of your core rotation and is going to go down here in the bottom section. If you're playing on Frost or you're playing on Unholy, this is going to be a utility ability that you will use fairly often, so it'll go up here on this top bar. Now, Death Strike is a 45 runic power cost ability, activatable at melee range, and it's an instant cast ability. It focuses dark power into a strike that deals physical damage and heals you for 25% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds. Minimum of 7% of your maximum health. So with Death Strike, a couple of things. It's a runic power spending ability. It does a decent amount of damage, and it heals you for damage that you've taken recently. So you can use Death Strike proactively to deal damage, or you can use it reactively. When you take a big burst of damage, you can Death Strike in order to heal 25% of that damage that you've taken. Now, no matter what, you're always going to get that minimum 7% of your maximum health. So you can kind of work out the calculations or pay attention to your health bar, depending on whether you have those percentages showing and stuff like that, so that you can see like, oh, I took, 10% of my health bar. Let me use Death Strike because I'm going to get, a little bit more health back in terms of the actual numbers, even though the percentage stays the same. After Death Strike, we have Death's Advance. Death's Advance is a movement skill ability, instant cast with a 45-second cooldown. It says for 10 seconds, your movement speed is increased by 35%. You cannot be slowed below 100% of normal speed, and you are immune to forced movement effects and knockbacks. So, we get a 10-second movement speed boost where we can't be slowed below 100% of our normal speed, and we also become immune to knockbacks and stuff like that for the duration. As a passive bonus on this ability, you cannot be slowed below 70% of your normal speed. So if some, other class or character has an ability that would snare you and reduce your movement speed by 50%, it's going to stop at 30% because you can't be reduced below 70%. Mainly, you're going to be using this to get around from point A to point B, or to quickly shoot across the battlefield if you need to, grab a enemy off of your healer or something of that nature. Usually, you're just going to be using it for a 10-second burst of speed to go from point A to point B, or to get out of the fire in like a raid. This is a utility ability we're going to use pretty often, so we're going to put that down here next to our Death Grip and call it good. Next up, we have Bound Fortitude. This is an instant cast ability with around a 3-minute cooldown. This causes your blood to freeze, granting immunity to stun effects and reducing all damage you take by 30% for 8 seconds. Now, not often are you going to have to worry too much about the stun effects. There's going to be, maybe some particular raid or dungeon fights where this comes into play, but this is definitely a lot more useful in PvP. That said, across the board, the 30% damage reduction is really awesome, and unlike some of the other damage mitigation that we've seen, this one is proactive in the sense that we just reduce damage going forward. It's not based on damage we've previously taken or anything like that. So this is a nice defensive cooldown that we can use, and we're going to put that right down here in this section. Next, we have Lichborn. This is the ability I was referencing before that you can use in combination with Death Coil as a means of healing yourself. This is instant cast with about a 2-minute cooldown. It says draw upon unholy energy to become undead for 10 seconds, increasing your leech by 10% and making you immune to charm, fear, and sleep. There's a lot of layers going on in here, right? So first off, you become undead for 10 seconds. That means that your Death Coil will now apply healing to you because you count as an undead. Next, you get 10% leech. So as you are hacking away and slamming on things, you get increased lifesteal from your attacks, which is going to help you stay healed up. On top of that, you gain immunity to charm, fear, and sleep, which is, decent in PvE, really good in PvP. So hitting Lichborn gives you a lot of options for things that you can do. And even though it's a pretty niche ability, it really just comes down to the timing, the situation, and the synergies that you might possibly get out of this and some of your other abilities, such as Death Coil. So this is a weird utility ability that we're going to drop down here next to our taunt as something we're going to want to be aware of, but not necessarily use all the time. Next up, we have Mind Freeze. This is our interrupt ability. It's got a 15-yard range, instant cast with a 15-second cooldown. You smash the target's mind with cold, interrupting spell casting and preventing any spell in that school from being cast for 3 seconds. So this is our standard interrupt. Bad guy do bad thing, you interrupt, and you're golden, right? That's basically what this is good for. You can stop spells, you can stop negative status effects, etc., etc. This is a crowd control ability, so we're going to put this down here next to our Chains of Ice, and that's going to be an ability that we're going to use all the time when we're questing and leveling, and at those strategic times in other situations. Next, we have Path of Frost. This costs 1 rune and is instant cast, and it's a nice utility ability here. It activates a freezing aura for 10 minutes that creates ice beneath your feet, allowing party or raid members within 50 yards to walk on water. This is usable while mounted, but being attacked or damaged will cancel the effect. So we're going to throw this over here on the side with our other sort of out of combat abilities here. As soon as we take some form of damage, we lose this buff. So a lot of times this is going to be an ability or something that doesn't get used very often in combat, except in some very, very specific situations. So we're going to throw that over here. Now, this is really nice because it does affect your party or raid members, and this will let you, for example, head out and just run across the water and get from point A to point B for a quest. It's a very handy utility, and a lot of your party members will appreciate it. Next up, we have Raise Ally. Now, Raise Ally is a battle res. Death Knights are one of the few classes that have access to a resurrection spell that you can use in battle, and that's what this is. It costs 30 runic power, is instant cast, has a 40-yard range, and a 10-minute cooldown. Really long cooldown on this, but it's a really powerful ability. Pours dark energy into a dead target, reuniting the spirit and body to allow the target to re-enter battle with 60% health and at least 20% mana. So the nice thing about this is, if your tank goes down or your healer goes down in a dungeon, you can whip out Raise Ally and hopefully get them on their feet and recover and continue with the dungeon without a full party wipe. So that's one of the reasons this has a 10-minute cooldown, and it's really powerful in situations like that. Now, this is a utility ability that we're not going to be using super frequently. So we're going to drop this down here next to our Lichborn and our Dark Command as an ability we want to pay attention to, but aren't necessarily going to use all the time. Next, we have Raise Dead. Now, Raise Dead is another sort of weird ability here in the sense that it plays out differently based on the spec that you're going to be playing as. So if you are playing on Frost or you're playing on Blood, then Raise Dead does this. 30-yard range, instant cast, 2-minute cooldown, raises a ghoul to fight by your side, You can have a maximum of 1 ghoul at a time, and the ghoul will last for 1 minute. So this is a ability where essentially every other minute you can have a ghoul buddy helping you out. And if you are using this as Blood or Frost, this is kind of a little offensive ability. It gives you that little DPS damage boost. And we're going to drop that in here on our offensive cooldown section here on the bottom, all the way on the right here. Now, this changes completely if you are playing as Unholy, because as Unholy, you raise a ghoul to fight by your side, and it has no duration. It's just there until it dies, and then you just click the button to summon a new one. In the case of Unholy, we're actually going to put Raise Dead over here on the side by our Path of Frost, because you're going to click it one time, and then you're just going to have a ghoul, set it and forget it until the ghoul dies. So unlike the other 2 specializations that are using this as that DPS cooldown, this is just baked into what you do as Unholy. Next, we have our Rune Forging ability, and this allows us to emblazon our weapons with runes that give us different effects. I'm going to have a separate video on Rune Forging and when to use the different runes, so be sure to check that out. For right now, we're going to drag this ability over here by our Path of Frost and just set it there as something that we'll check out later, and we'll be setting up outside of combat. Now, we have a couple more abilities to cover. The first one here is Sacrificial Pact, which you get access to at level 54. This costs 20 runic power and is instant cast with a 2-minute cooldown. You sacrifice your ghoul to deal a little bit of damage to 8 nearby enemies. So when you take that little bit of damage and you amplify it by up to 8 target enemies, it's actually a fairly significant amount. And heal for 25% of your maximum health. So if you're Unholy and you have your ghoul out, you can pop this, do some AoE damage, and get a heal off if you need it. You could do the same thing if you're Blood or Frost, but you have to time it with your use of Raise Dead. So ideally, what you would probably do here is you would Raise Dead, have them fight by your side for, 55 seconds or something like that, then smash Sacrificial Pact to do that explosion in order to get that extra little bit of damage out of your ghoul and also heal yourself potentially. Sacrificial Pact works as an offensive cooldown, so when you have that available, we're going to put it down here next to Raise Dead for Blood and Frost, and off on its own if you're Unholy. Next, we have one of the passive abilities that's available to all Death Knight specializations, and this is On a Pale Horse. It says you're as hard to stop as death itself, increasing your amount of movement speed by 20%. Pretty simple. Pretty straightforward. You go 20% faster on a mount. Good job. You're slow in almost every other aspect, so at least you got that going for you. Our next and final ability is another passive called Veteran of the Third War. All this does is increase your stamina by a flat percentage. If you're playing as Blood, it increases it by 60%. If you're playing as Frost or Unholy, it increases it by 10%. So you get a little bonus health when you're playing as a Death Knight. All right, so that's going to do it for this ability and spell overview video for the Death Knight in World of Warcraft Shadowlands. Like I said, we'll be doing other videos that go into the spec-specific pages of the spellbook and cover those abilities in depth, just like we did here in this video for the generic ones. There's also going to be more videos that cover Covenant abilities, talent builds, all that kind of good stuff. So hit the playlist in the description below for a link to those videos where you can check those out. Please check the description below for a link to the Patreon where you can support the channel and more videos like this and the other ones that I make on my channel, such as my add-on videos, UI videos, and other class guides. I also have a link to the channel Discord down there that you can check out to come and join our community. And there's a link to my website where I post resources as I make them available to you guys. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, help the channel continue to grow. I hope you guys are having fun in World of Warcraft Shadowlands, and I'll see you on the next video.